I'm Indy Nidell, and this is a Great War special episode about Italian pistols during the First World War. And we're doing this in conjunction with C&Rsenal, who is our favorite other channel in the entire history of the world and space and time, and their awesome host, Othais. Othais, say hello.
Hi. If you guys haven't seen the last episode, just go watch it now because that's got most of the introduction. But, quick recap, I'm again from C&Rsenal. If there's anything in this that you feel like's missing or you want to go into more detail, go check our channel before you complain to Indy, because this is a sort of general overview of one country. It doesn't have every gun. It doesn't have every variant. That's what we do on our channel.
That's what they do. We talk about the war, they talk about the guns.
All right, so this time we're doing the pistols, so let's get into those. I'm going to start with the oldest of that war, and honestly one that served through World War II. That's going to be the BODEO. Now, I know you guys can't see much from out there, so I'm going to zoom in right away on this guy. All right, now this is obviously a revolver. It's still an old black powder design, although the Italians would do a little work to modernize that cartridge to keep it moving as fast as possible. It is a gate loader, which means that we have to open the side and then load one at a time. This uses that good old BODEO system, which means the gate disconnects the hammer, so I can pull the trigger and then load one, pull the trigger, load one. If we were unloading, it's the same thing. We've got an ejector rod, eject, eject, eject. There we go. The other thing you may notice on this one is the dangling trigger. This is one of two models of the BODEO. I don't have the other, unfortunately. The other just has a trigger guard. This guy doesn't dangle. It looks just like a regular revolver, so very easy to imagine. I like having this one because it shows this unusual safety feature, which is that the Italians were worried about people sort of shooting themselves quite literally in their foot. If we have this holstered at our side, the trigger is now flush with the gun. And if I draw it, I can't accidentally pull the trigger and shoot myself very easily. I'd have to try very hard to do that. Instead, as I bring it to bear, it naturally comes down where I can grab it. So until I'm about here at an angle pointing away from myself, I can't really work the trigger on the gun, which wouldn't be all that helpful if you were being attacked by a very large insect. But in terms of fighting other men, it's a good idea because you don't end up with that sort of problem where soldiers would yank their gun out of the holster by the trigger, thereby shooting themselves right in the leg. So good little safety feature. All right, if we zoom back in, this is a single and double action, which means I can either manually cock that hammer back and fire it, or I can pull it all the way through and fire it that way. So light single action pull, heavy double action pull, we've talked about that before. The other good thing about this gun is that it is extremely easy to dismantle. So if we flip her around, we'll see that we just have a knob that we can spin to the left. Whoop, whoop, whoop. It is captive, so there's nothing to lose. And then all I do is I spin this plate out, and we are inside the action. So gun, piece of wood, piece of metal, that's it. Not a lot to lose in a trench, very easy to get in there and service. And the BODEO is unique for its time because in 1889 it really is sort of anachronistic. It's a much older pattern of revolver. There were better ideas out there. There were swing out cylinders just coming out the next year. It could have been so much more, but instead it's very consciously chosen to be a lot less because this has the minimum number of parts that you would need to be a functioning single and double action revolver, which means that if you're Italy, and as we talked about, Italy had a very weak industrial base, this is perfect. You can manufacture this with as few parts as possible. It works reliably. At that time, black powder cartridges were on the way out, but that's what they knew because the 10.35 revolver cartridge, the ordnance cartridge that went with this, had been used on the previous revolver, the earlier Chemlo, Delvine, and Glicenti revolvers. So they didn't want to change their ammunition type. That's why they kept the older style cartridge. But also, being a weaker powered black powder cartridge, they were able to make this frame out of iron. So the cylinder and the hammer and some of the other important pieces like the trigger and things like that, they're steel, but the frame is actually iron. So that means that you can make this gun with rudimentary material and rudimentary tools, which would come in handy because this revolver was also produced for Italy by Spain. Remember, we talked about the Ruby being produced for the French. The Italians also bought a Ruby pistol, but not in nearly the numbers that the French did. And they bought a lot of these guys by 3 different manufacturers. We have a whole video about it, but basically it saved Italy a lot of trouble because the Spanish it was very easy for the Spanish to replicate this gun. It's the simplest possible revolver there is. And it works. It works well enough. The Italians would nickname it the leg of lamb. I think you can tell why. Yeah, can see why. But it was a reliable revolver, and they had so many of them that they never were able to displace it. It was used all the way through World War II. So this is one of those things you can laugh at it, you can say it's crude, you can say it's nowhere near as polished as other guns, a lot like the Carcano, only this is much cruder than the Carcano in terms of its contemporaries. But you can't argue with the fact that it works. It was reliable, it went bang every time, it was cheap to produce millions of them, and honestly, it worked. You don't need a handgun to be a lot when you're a major power. You're not looking to fight an entire war with just this gun. It's a backup gun. And it does that job very, very well. Although, it is fairly heavy compared to World War I contemporaries. It was extremely light compared to its previous models that would have been around, like the Chamelot Delvine and that. Those were very heavy revolvers. So not perfect for World War I, but way above where it was when Italy adopted this gun.
Question. You mentioned the Rubies. When the Rubies were produced, and you said, the Spanish factories, different factories, the ammunition, you'd have to get ammunition from the right factory because they didn't all fit. Did they have this same problem with these, or?
Well, you were thinking of the magazines. So because it's a revolver, no, it's just hand fit. So the only problem with these is that the Italians would later have to refurbish a lot of the Spanish ones and their own. So you tend to find these blued. I actually have a nice dark blue black one right here. It looks a heck of a lot nicer than this other one. This one's the original World War I unfinished, like in the white, as they call it. So it has some foxing on it. It looks worn out. It looks like somebody's taken all the finish off of it. No, this is actually original. This is one of the Spanish ones that ended up getting reblued because they were having problems with rust and wear, and also some of the parts were refit because they're a little looser. There's a big difference between an Italian-made one and a Spanish-made one, but they both work as well. It's just that one of them has a little bit more slop to it. Again, though, if you're shooting a mild black powder cartridge out of a big frame revolver like this, that made out of mild metal, I mean, you're talking about iron, there's not a lot, quote-unquote, to go wrong, because even if it's poorly designed, or even if it's poorly done ammo, or let's say it's poorly done material, it's a large, thick-walled cylinder, it's got top strap action, it's a heavily reinforced revolver. It compares well with the old Colt Army in terms of just being rugged, except for the Colt Army was obviously made out of superior material. But this is something that you can crank out, and it turned out to be a really good idea because when you get to World War I that nobody was expecting, you needed to crank material out. It's very interesting that Italy was well poised to actually produce enough arms for itself because it was cautious in what it purchased. And we'll later see countries like Greece and things like that buying more expensive style, higher finish rifles and then struggling to stay armed throughout the war because they did not match their service rifle to their production or even available licensing capabilities. So Italy at least matched itself to its industrial base in World War I. World War II is where we're going to see Italy far outreach its industrial base. All right, well, moving on, we'll leave behind revolvers, so I'll put this guy away. And we'll start talking about semi-automatic pistols because Italy did get into the semi-automatic pistol market fairly early. One thing that they would do is they would buy contract C96s for the Italian Navy. We do not have an Italian contract one here, and we've already covered the C96. There's nothing else to really say about that. They purchased 5,000, and they would later try to displace them with another pistol that we will talk about in just a second. But first Italian pistol is going to be the good old Glisenti. Now, I'm going to have to zoom in or everybody's going to think this is a Luger. There we go. I think we can see that pretty clearly. Now, there's going to be some reflection because she is flat as a board on the side. This monstrous-looking pistol is a magazine-fed semi-automatic handgun. So we have our magazine. It uses what is called 9mm Glicenti. This is a cartridge. When this gun was first developed, it was chambered in a milder 7.65 cartridge. The Italian military wanted a stronger cartridge, so they pushed it up. They basically kept comparing it to German 9mm Parabellum. So they pushed the cartridge dimensions up to 9mm Parabellum. It's almost identical to the German 9mm Parabellum cartridge, physically. Powder-wise, nowhere near. This thing is much milder. It will feed and fire German 9mm Parabellum. If you have one, please don't put it in there. It will damage the gun, and it possibly hurt you. Yep, but this is a locking action gun. It's just not as strong a lock as the Luger. So it has a little sort of swing arm down there that locks on the underside of the bolt. It's not that easy to get all the way down in there, but this guy has a couple of unique features. One, it has a safety set at the rear. That is a twist knob safety. Two, it has a grip safety, but the grip safety is set at the front. So it's this textured area here. So you have to squeeze in order to fire the gun. Now the Glicenti is kind of interesting because this pistol was developed by Bethel Ravelli, and then the patent was registered in Glicenti's name, Alfredo Glicenti, who was going to produce the pistol but then died, and his family did not carry on the production, so it ended up being produced by MBT. So you've got 3 names involved just to get this thing out the door. The Italian army would purchase, I believe in the long run, they'd see about 30,000 of these guys. So not the most massive pistol when you talk about, you know, the large numbers of the BODEO revolver. This thing never pushed the revolver out of the way. A simpler version of this gun would be adopted in 1913 by the Italian Navy to try to displace the C-96. And then, of course, World War I happens. They need every pistol they can get. So there were roughly 5,000 of a simplified model. That's called the Brixia. No parts are interchangeable, although they look almost identical. All they tried to do was make the action a lot simpler to work. So it's just, there's fewer parts. The parts are simpler shapes. It was all designed to make this thing faster to produce.
And we're off with more Italian firearms from the First World War, and Othais from C&Rsenal is going to continue spinning us yarns about some of these weapons that the Italian soldiers used. Take it away, sir.
Okay, so getting back into pistols, we have, this is a big one for a lot of you out there, the Beretta 1915. So let's zoom in on this guy. One caveat here is this one was refinished at some point. It's supposed to be more of a reddish color. We're looking for a better example, but that's okay. Just ignore the color for a moment and everything will be fine. This, by the way, fairly large Beretta handgun was really their first military endeavor. This chambers that same 9mm Glicenti cartridge and was introduced as a way to simplify from that very, very, very complex, overly heavy, overly complicated Vetterli pistol. This is a straight blowback. It uses a buffer spring to help reduce that because it is still, Glicenti is weaker than 9mm Parabellum. That does not mean it is a quote-unquote weak, terrible cartridge. It's not as low as, say, 380 or 32, which are common blowback cartridges. So having shot this, it's fairly robust recoil because you are shooting something a little bit above a blowback caliber in a blowback gun. But that makes it simple to manufacture. You can see that it's heavily influenced by Browning and Mauser. If I pull this slide back, we can see the beginnings of what would be the sort of typical Beretta front slide layout, where it's been cut open at the front. They have not yet attached the front sight to the slide. In the US, I know there's going to be a lot of Beretta fans. In Italy, I know there's going to be a lot of Beretta fans. So this is sort of that beginning of that open top, although we still have a separate ejection port to give some rigidity there. This is an extremely simple pistol. Again, magazine fed, better capacity than that revolver, heel release, very hefty. I mean, I have large hands and you can see it's still fitting well in my grip. This is a big boy gun. Now, if I turn her around, we have 2 safeties. I don't know what's up with Italians and redundancy, but we have a standard sort of slide lock and disconnect safety there. And then On the back, and this might be hard for you guys to see, let me know if you can make out that little switch back there. That is a hammer safety that turns and locks the hammer itself so that the hammer can't be dropped. So I can pull the trigger all day, the hammer can't go anywhere until I release that. Which to me seems a little confusing because now we've got 2 safeties and there's 2 chances to mess up, but the Italians must have liked it. These would be produced in fairly significant numbers, closing on the same thing as the Glisenti, although during wartime. It would, however, be replaced by an even simpler pistol, which is again another Beretta design. Now that handgun is very closely related to this one. This is the 15-17. So if we zoom in, I'll do a quick comparison. This is much handier. Now this is the same essential pistol minus the buffer spring and extra rear safety. It only has the 1 safety now. This is the correct coloration, so we would hope that our 15 would look just like this if we find another one. This little handgun is in 32 ACP, which is a friendly blowback cartridge. So this is a mild, easy handling pistol, and this is really the birth of what we consider the sort of golden age of Beretta, because this pistol is going to go on until it eventually warps into the Beretta 34, which is sort of world famous. And all this styling can be brought back across again. We have our open top front slide, but with a separate ejection port. That's going to get changed to a closed front with the front sight, and they're going to get rid of the ejection ports, and then that's going to be quintessentially Beretta for years to come. These were made in much more significant numbers and much shorter time. They are finely finished, finely milled, and extremely reliable. The Beretta handgun is probably the most outstanding weapon of Italy of the First World War, and probably the Second World War as well. They made a name for themselves for good reason. These are very good personal handguns.
Well, that's why everybody in the world, even people that don't follow your channel or my channel, knows what a Beretta is.
Yes, and that all starts with this. Now, to be fair, I want to give proper credit. These were designed by Tullio Marangoni, so not quote-unquote Beretta. He was their designer. He came up with the initial, and then it was reformed into this, and then over the years, this is going to get reworked and reworked until it turns into what we recognize as sort of the 380 and 32 Berettas of the mid-century. And then from there, those Berettas are going to get paired with the P38's locking system, and then they're going to go on into what we think of the 92 series, which is what everybody recognizes now. So the styling, the heart of the 92 started way back in 1915, although its locking system would come out of World War II Germany. Yeah, it's odd to see how things sort of carry on in different lines. And it's also interesting to see that we have this sort of rear frame mounted safety right at the rear. And then later on, much later in history, we're going to see some popularity for safety decockers up on the slide, almost in the same position, but in a slightly more ergonomic space. So it's not that it was completely stupid, it's just a little ahead of its time and a little awkward in its placement. But the Berettas would serve very, very well and leave a lasting impression. Unfortunately, the 1915 would be the death of the Glisenti cartridge. There's no other pistols that come out after this that chamber the same cartridge, because by then the Italians were more interested in using actual 9mm Parabellum or going all the way back down to 32 ACP, and then they'd sort of meet in the middle with 380 for a number of years too.
Flo's like nodding his head like, huh, I had no idea. So
but as far as handguns go, that's sort of where we're at. So if we do a quick review, here, let's do a zoom in. We start with a antiquated revolver that is very simple to manufacture. Then we get tired of the antiquated revolver and we go for a attempt at a very modern locking pistol that is extremely difficult to manufacture, to the point that it does not fit the Italian manufacturing system at all. This causes so many problems that they decide to try to manufacture another pistol using that same cartridge, a cartridge that was a compromise to begin with, and really is sort of, I'm afraid it's kind of a bastard cartridge. It just doesn't fit anywhere in the spectrum because it tries to emulate a much bigger cartridge, but the action it was designed around couldn't handle it. So weak that they ended up going with a straight blowback, because this is not strong at all. So you might as well go with something that can blow back because the cartridge is so weak. Well, then this ends up being too much trouble, not because it's the most complicated pistol, but there's a few redundancies, a few extras that we don't want, and at this point, why do we even need that 9mm Gosenti cartridge? So we come out with this guy, who's much easier to manufacture. The ammunition we can just get on the street because it's 32 ACP. It was everywhere back in the day. And that's where we end. Italy stays with a very simple pistol from then on.
Okay, well that's it for Italian handguns from the First World War. Again, this was one of our fantastic collaborations with C&Rsenal and their host Othais, and if you have not already subscribed to their channel, you should definitely go and check it out because they go into so much more depth about these things than we are able to go into. Othais, if you'd like to say goodbye, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and we're always glad to help out, and we look forward to seeing you all again.
Absolutely. We have several more countries to do. We have a lot of rifles. We've got a lot of handguns. We've got some machine guns to do. And do not forget to subscribe for all your dreams to come true. See you next time.